Horror movies have the ability to thrill and terrify us. For many people, a good horror movie can have a haunting presence for years, or even a lifetime. But the genre is overrun with B-movies and cheap scares. That's what makes it even more satisfying to see a well-crafted horror film. Of course, it's impossible to say objectively, but today we're counting down the top 10 best horror movies based on popular opinion. Premiering 50 years ago, on October 1st, 1968, George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead is often spoken of as a manifesto for the modern horror film. This landmark horror film begins in a cemetery, with nods to Vincent Price, 1950s B-movies and Universal horror. Brother Johnny, played by Russell Striner, and Barbara, played by Judith O'Dea, arrive to put flowers on their father's grave. There they are attacked by a zombie. Barbara flees from the graveyard to a remote farmhouse in the Pennsylvania countryside. Though audiences today have come to expect zombies and undead characters, they were novel and truly frightening in the 60s when Night of the Living Dead premiered. Romero revolutionized the horror film genre with the movie. According to Almar Haflidason of the BBC, the film represented a new dawn in horror filmmaking. The film has also effectively redefined the use of the term zombie. While the word zombie itself is never used, Romero's film introduced the theme of zombies as reanimated flesh-eating cannibals. Night of the Living Dead also ushered in the splatter film subgenre. As one film historian points out, horror prior to Romero's film had mostly involved rubber masks and costumes, cardboard sets, or mysterious figures lurking in the shadows. The landscape of horror films has never been the same. Recently, filmmaker Tobe Hooper died at the age of 74, leaving behind a legacy of innovation in horror films that indisputably began with his lurid masterpiece, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. In part because of his roots as a documentarian, there's a rawness to the film that still makes it infinitely compelling today. Hooper was renowned for making a truly terrifying film on a shoestring budget. The 1974 classic was produced for only $140,000. Even adjusted for inflation, this is well under $1 million, meaning that the filmmaker had very little to work with. The limited budget forced Hooper to film for long hours 7 days a week so he could finish as quickly as possible and reduce equipment rental costs. Due to the film's violent content, Hooper struggled to find a distributor. Louis Pirano of Bryanston Pictures eventually purchased the distribution rights. Hooper limited the quantity of on-screen gore in hopes of securing a PG rating, but the Motion Picture Association of America rated it R. Upon its October 1974 release, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was banned outright in several countries, and numerous theaters later stopped showing the film in response to complaints about its violence. While it initially drew a mixed reception from critics, it was highly profitable, grossing over $30 million at the domestic box office, equivalent with roughly over $150.8 million as of 2019, selling over 16.5 million tickets in 1974. It is credited with originating several elements common in the slasher genre, including the use of power tools as murder weapons, the characterization of the killer as a large, hulking, faceless figure, and the killing of victims. And so, a relatively anonymous director from Austin, Texas created one of the most influential and popular horror movies of all time, making it number 9 on our countdown. Roman Polanski's first Hollywood feature was an adaptation of Ira Levin's bestseller, and its success launched a trend for devil baby and satanic pregnancy movies that extended well into the 70s. The film works on multiple levels, as a supernatural thriller, as a psychological thriller about a paranoid pregnant woman who imagines herself at the center of a conspiracy, and as the last word in marital betrayal, since the most despicable villain here is surely Guy, who allows his wife to be raped by the devil in exchange for an acting role. Jordan Peele has said that his directorial debut, the Oscar-winning Get Out, was highly influenced by Rosemary's Baby. The same can be said for John Krasinski's first horror flick, The Quiet Place. Roman Polanski earned an Oscar nomination for adapting Ira Levin's novel, and Ruth Gordon won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress as Mia Farrow's eccentric old neighbor. Farrow herself was nominated for a BAFTA, the British Academy Awards, a Golden Globe, and several other awards. The American Film Institute 2001 list of the best heart-pounding movies had Rosemary's Baby at number 9, between The French Connection and Raiders of the Lost Ark. In addition, the film was a financial success, making 10 times its budget at the box office. Due to its legendary status in horror film history, Rosemary's Baby comes in at number 8 on our list. These days, it's pretty much a given that a hit film will get a sequel, but in 1931, when James Whale's Frankenstein was breaking all kinds of box office records and establishing Universal Studios as a major force, the rules weren't so clearly laid out. The studio wasn't really too sure how this softly spoken British director had made such an incredible, groundbreaking horror movie in the first place, and as he was clearly on a roll following his hit with The Invisible Man and The Old Dark House, the studio pretty much let him get on with the sequel as he saw fit. As with the first film, Bride of Frankenstein was directed by James Whale whale and stars Boris Karloff as the monster. The sequel features Elsa Lanchester in the dual role of Mary Shelley and the monster's mate at the end of the film. Colin Clive reprises his role as Henry Frankenstein, and Ernest Thesiger plays the role of Dr. Septimus Pretorius. Bride of Frankenstein was subjected to censorship, both during production by the Hays Office and following its release by local and national censorship boards. Joseph Breen, lead censor for the Hays Office, objected to lines of dialogue in the originally submitted script in which Henry Frankenstein and his works were compared to that of God. Though it seems tame now, the film was considered crass and violent at the time. Bride of Frankenstein was profitable for Universal, with a 1943 report showing that the film had by then earned approximately $2 million, or $29 million in 2019 money for the studio, a profit of about $950,000, or $13.8 million as of 2019. For its influential role in horror films and sequels themselves, Bride of Frankenstein is number 7 on our countdown. Coming in at number 6 is Stanley Kubrick's 1980 classic The Shining. Based on the popular Stephen King novel, it follows Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, as he descends into madness with his family in a remote Colorado hotel. Unlike Kubrick's previous works, which developed audiences gradually through word of mouth, The Shining was released as a mass-market film, initially opening in 2 U.S. cities on Memorial Day, then nationwide within a month. The Shining had a slow start at the box office, but gained momentum, eventually doing well commercially during the summer of 1980 and making Warner Brothers a profit. Though it received mixed reviews initially, the public had a massive reappraisal over the years and welcomed it into the lexicon of classic horror movies. In 2001, the film was ranked 29th on American Film Institute's Top 100 Horror Films list, and Jack Torrance was named the 25th greatest villain on the AFI's 100 Best Heroes and Villains list in 2003. In 2005, the quote "Here's Johnny" was ranked 68 on AFI's 100 Best Movie Quotes list. It's now widely accepted to be one of the best horror movies of all time. Silence of the Lambs was an enormous critical and commercial success. It's a film with the most sensational entrance scene in modern film history. FBI rookie Clarice Starling is sent to interview notorious incarcerated serial killer Dr. Hannibal Lecter in his glass cell to see if he can be intrigued or persuaded or teased into helping the agency track down another psychotic murderer, nicknamed Buffalo Bill, who is still at large. With her sharp-faced intensity, Jodie Foster is outstanding as Clarice, the brilliant young operative. In fact, the whole cast has been revered for their performances. Critically acclaimed upon release, it became only the 3rd film, the other 2 being It Happened One Night and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, to win Academy Awards in all the top 5 categories: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Adapted Screenplay. It is also the first and so far only Best Picture winner widely considered to be a horror film, and only the 3rd such film to be nominated in the category, after The Exorcist in 1973 and Jaws in 1975. This critical acclaim makes Silence of the Lambs number 5 on our countdown. Directed in 1979 by Ridley Scott, Alien was a critical and box office success that went on to spawn countless sequels, video games, novels, crossovers with the Predator films, comics, and of course toys and collectibles. The movie worked well by blending elements of science fiction and horror into a tale that was chilling not because of blood and gore, but because of the deadly and highly suspenseful game of cat and mouse played by Ripley and the alien. With the design of the alien handled by H.R. Giger, the look of the film was unique, dark, and very different from what had been previously seen on screen. Now close to 40 years later, the movie holds up and is as terrifying now as it was upon initial release. It was met with critical acclaim and box office success, winning the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, 3 Saturn Awards including Best Science Fiction Film, Best Director for Scott, and Best Supporting Actress for Veronica Cartwright, and a Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation, along with numerous other nominations. It has been constantly praised in the years since its release, and is considered one of the greatest films of all time. In 2002, Alien was deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant by the Library of Congress, and was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry. In 2008, it was ranked by the American Film Institute as the 7th best film in the science fiction genre, and as the 33rd greatest film of all time by Empire magazine. Other than perhaps War of the Worlds, Alien is the most influential extraterrestrial movie of all time, making it number 4 on our list. Coming in at number 3, Jaws is widely acknowledged as one of the most influential American films ever made. It was the first summer blockbuster as we've come to know them, creating more or less on its own the business model of modern movies. Wide distribution combined with television ads during the summer. That system seems obvious in hindsight, but at the time it was radical. That Jaws would become a mega hit that would push Spielberg's burgeoning career into the stratosphere was a surprise. but nobody could have predicted that it would also establish the blueprint for modern-day blockbusters. Now celebrating its 43rd birthday, right in the middle of yet another summer movie-going season, it's worth acknowledging just how much every big movie released this time of year owes to Spielberg and his shark. And at a time when audiences are positively swimming in big, loud franchise movies, it's productive to recall just how much this one represented a true filmmaking talent. Made for less than $9 million, Jaws went on to make over $470 million in global returns, including a $260 million domestic take that earned it the top spot at the box office in 1975. The film toppled other high-powered hits like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Dog Day Afternoon, all huge moneymakers that were decidedly non-blockbuster in nature. Jaws was the first feature film to break $235 million in domestic returns. Nearly half a century after its release, it still ranks in the all-time top 100. Adjusted for inflation, it ranks at number 7 for box office returns. Alfred Hitchcock has made his name as the master of suspense, with brilliant, glossy thrillers like Rear Window and North by Northwest. But Psycho was altogether different, the likes of which most cinema goers had never seen. With its shocking bursts of violence and provocative sexual explicitness, Psycho tested the strict censorship boundaries of the day, as well as audiences' mettle, and it gave Hitchcock the biggest hit of his career. Awakened to the box office potential of violence and sex, mainstream filmmakers followed suit. The 45-second shower murder in Psycho is possibly the most famous scene in cinema history. The film is also the very first in the history of American cinema to feature a flushing toilet, which was considered a taboo at the time. Now also add the idea that Hitchcock supposedly decided to shoot in black and white so the blood, which was chocolate syrup, wouldn't be red, thus cooling down the ratings board. The movie really broke taboos and pushed the envelope, and in the present it can be viewed as a revolutionary work, changing the face of the beloved genre. For its revolutionary take on suspense, Psycho earns the number 2 spot on our countdown. Though it is dated, many consider The Exorcist to be the scariest film of all time. Some say it is one of the few examples of a prestige horror film. It was something of a surprise when director William Friedkin, red hot after winning an Oscar for The French Connection, chose to adapt William Peter Blatty's smash hit novel of demonic possession for his next film. Tales abound of the director's unorthodox approach, from his randomly firing a gun to scare his actors to physically slapping them to elicit reactions, and even his refrigerating the set to get them uncomfortable and to get their breath visible as vapor. Whatever possessed him certainly worked. There's a bleak mood that pervades almost every frame. Like any great horror film, it was almost a rite of passage to see it. What also made The Exorcist so different from usual horror was that it placed the horror in the home, in the family, and in an innocent child, played by Linda Blair, who never really seemed to escape from this film's shadow. One other person key to the film's success is legendary makeup artist Dick Smith. Smith not only created the subtle possession prosthetics for Blair, but also convincingly aged Max von Sydow's father Merritt, who was only in his 40s at the time. The film went on to be the biggest grossing of all time, until Jaws knocked it off the top spot a year or so later.